Kia ora tātou. I'm not sure about this goddess of citizen science business. I'll just come here as myself. I'm going to talk to you today about community conservation hubs. And I guess what I'm doing is I'm giving you a bit of a community context as to some of the work that's been happening and that's going to be talked about today. So I was funded to do this work by the Department of Conservation head office. And when I look at what's happening sort of generally in conservation, and particularly through a community lens, I see an enormous amount of change that's happened in a very, very short space of time. It's incredibly dynamic. We've got not only community groups engaged in a whole range of activities, planting, weeding, education, advocacy, predator control, the list goes on and on. We also have quite a range of different resources out there to help community groups do what they do really well. So we've got a whole thing happening in the space of technology, new tools for community groups to use to collect, house and analyse their data, funky drone technology as well to do some really cool stuff there. We've got large-scale government programs, and I'm particularly interested in how and the ways in which people get information. And I'm looking at how social media has made a huge change in the way that we communicate with one another, where we get information and how we share information with each other as well, and particularly how community groups use social media tools as well to promote what they're doing, to get people along to the activities that they're doing as well. And then within the bigger picture here is also those government programs that are out there, predator-free, and things like the Nation of Curious Minds, and also that disastrous environment, Aotearoa, which showed us that things are really going downhill fast. So when I try to think about how best to bring all of this together, how to show the complexity and the multiple layers and the networks in between, I thought I should do a drawing, because I have a fine arts degree and I'm sure I can come up with something that really expresses this really succinctly. So I came up with this. I thought long and hard about this. I do have a master's degree, I'll be quite upfront about that. But as you can see down the bottom, the recommendation from PowerPoint was to title it as a picture containing a webbed outdoor object or giraffe. So I may need to do a bit more work on my visualisation skills around the complexity of community conservation. So I'm here to talk about hubs. And it's quite a general term. So I guess in the course of the work that I was doing for the Department of Conservation to bring this piece of research together, I came up with my own definition of what a hub is. And yes, it is extremely broad. And so what I'm going to do is just to give you some of the characteristics of hubs and the different types of projects that I looked at. And so again, I thought, how do I visualise hubs within this broader network? And I came up with, I know you'll all be really impressed with this. And again, I didn't even bother putting the recommended thing there. So anyway, when we look at what's happening in the community environmental sector, we have a whole lot of different words being used. So the word hub is not used a lot. But what we do have is things like projects and trusts and societies and centres and networks and forums, and then all of the pest-free, predator-free initiatives as well. And I've just put up a few examples there. And if we try and sort of divvy that up and say, well, how do we form some sort of a classification to actually make sense of the complexity out there? The best I could do was really to come up with something that is spatial. So looking at national networks, national programs, regional networks or programs, or sub-regional networks and programs. And some examples are these. So regional programs, we have Waikato up in the Auckland area, and also environment centres focusing on a specific area. Some of the environment centres have a strong sustainability focus. Some of them also have a strong community group support focus in there as well. There are whole landscape scale projects which operate at for example, a sub-regional level, and I'll talk about one of those a little bit later. And then of course we have all of those amazing pest-free initiatives which seem to be sprouting up left, right, centre, frankly everywhere from Krakaya right down to the bottom of Stewart Island. The one question that was raised during a meeting I attended recently was like, well, there's so much bureaucracy, there are so many layers out there altogether. So if you're trying to create a hub, is that just not another layer? Do we really need these things? And I think Skye Davis from the Tasman Environment Trust actually sums it up really well. And it's about how a hub can add value. So I'll just let you read that. I'm not going to do PowerPoint karaoke because you can read faster than I can speak. So it just gives you an idea about some of the things that hubs can do to add value to community conservation collectively. So let's have a look at how a hub might form. So we'll shoot up to Northland here. And what we've had for a long time up there is a lot of separate community groups working very much on predator control, doing weed control, habitat enhancement type projects. And overhead, an overlay on that over quite a long time frame was to bring together a series of groups that works in the Whangarei Heads area, and they've come together as the Whangarei Heads Landcare Forum, and my colleagues at the Landcare Trust were very instrumental in making this happen. So this is a way to get those groups to work collectively, to share their expertise, to learn from one another. But there are a whole lot of other projects out there sort of spread up that eastern coastline. And so these have coalesced into the Kiwi Coast project. And what I like about this project is that the objective of enhancing Kiwi populations and making them safe and secure and enabling them to expand out has been a key driver. And it doesn't matter whether you live on a coastal property or you're a fifth generation farmer back up in the hills, you can relate to this idea of protecting Kiwi. And so that's been a real powerful driver for actually bringing groups together, remaining with their individual identities remaining, but being a collective under the Kiwi Coast project. And then we have Reconnecting Northland, which is a meta project across Northland. And if we look at the timescale, it's actually taken 20 years for that to happen. So forming a hub is not just something that happens overnight. It takes years to build up those relationships, to build up those structures, to help those groups work together effectively to reach those meta goals. And one thing I like about the Kiwi Coast project is that they have a good 10 years of data to show that the work that they are doing is increasing Kiwi populations. So they're very outcome focused. In the PCE's report, Taonga of an Island Nation, there were a couple of pages tucked in the back about community groups. And so some of the things that were identified that groups needed a bit of help with were administration and accounting, sourcing funding, reporting, that's always a huge task, training and certification, as well as just general advice. And so when I had a look at what some of the activities that these different hubs around New Zealand are involved with, we get a whole range of different activities there. And I've just put down some examples there. Some of these are urban. The Eastern Bay Songbird Trust covers about 4 different suburbs in Auckland. Whereas the Kiwi Coast project, as I showed you, was very much rurally focused. When we look across to places like the UK, there's quite a different setup over there. There isn't the need for all of these individual little groups to form trusts like we have in New Zealand. I think we have over 17,000 trusts and societies in New Zealand. We have so many. Over in the UK, they have these 46 trusts, so one for every sort of district area, and these very much act as hubs. So groups that don't have to be formalised can go to these hubs, trusts, and get help with all sorts of things like funding proposals, and these will also support getting the funding and then giving it to these smaller entities. So it's a much simpler structure, and what it does is it cuts down on the huge amount of time needed to do all of that reporting back to funders, and also the reporting that we have to do here, for example, to the Charities Commission for these smaller trusts and societies. So, as I mentioned, I was doing this piece of research for the Department of Conservation, and what I really wanted to highlight to them is that there is such a diversity of need in the different regions around New Zealand that there isn't like a one-size-fits-all. So if you want to build a hub, there isn't kind of a model that you can kind of pick up and say, right, let's use this because it's going to work here. because you can see that, if we have a look through some of those sort of characteristics there, funding, governance and tech support, that all of these vary dramatically across those different organisations, and that depends on a whole lot of different things within that particular area. It depends on the social makeup, it depends on landscape, it depends on the type of support that's out there, it depends on the type of need that is out there as well. And the reason that I put in this bottom one is that there's very few of these hubs that are actually self-sustaining. So the model is very much to rely on those external sources of contestable funding. And at times there will be some ongoing support through councils, which is fantastic. But a lot of times it's a lottery. If we look at training needs, for example, basic ecological monitoring, that's a space that I've been involved with for quite a number of years. But professional development, and I think that this is very much an understudied and underprovided for area for community level conservation initiatives. And these are things like, governance, how to actually manage your group effectively, strategic planning, and also evaluation. How effective is the work that you are doing? And again, there's an issue here because these things are very, very rarely funded. I just put up this picture of my colleague Janet Cole, who works for the fabulous Kaipātiki project, and I just wanted to put this up as a comment that a lot of these hubs have got really big objectives, really huge visions, but they are often very, very understaffed. They have a very limited amount of people who do all of this amazing work. We could carbon copy people like Janet 3 times just to get the work done in the Kaipātiki project, to include all of those sorts of things like evaluation, to upscale the work, to get that community engagement up to that next level. I put here I've got my research hat on. I was kind of like, right, now how do we actually move this whole thing forward? And I guess I do have a research focus in putting things like better understanding the limitations and looking at the kinds of tools that hubs use to evaluate their effectiveness. I mean, how do they do that? That's something that I'm very, very curious about. And again, I'm always going to come back to this funding side of things, especially for community conservation. That providing longer term funding is really critical to make those changes happen on the ground, and you're going to sit there sort of nodding like those little animals that people have in the back of their cars, like that. But I didn't want to end up on a sort of a really dull slide, and I went to one of my favourite artists out there, Michael Lernig, who really just sort of hits the nail on the head. Keep on growing things. Thank you.